the effect that he wants to get from the substance, because you have used another substance that blocks and that competes with the substance of choice. So you don't really get effect. But if you use another substance, also it can block maybe the metabolism. For instance, if you use disulfiram, like in some places they may use disulfiram for people who withdraw from alcohol. It's discovered that it affects with the metabolism of alcohol in the system, and that can make the patient, accumulation of some other metabolites with alcohol, and the patient might come down with so many adverse effects that he may not really like it or want to undergo the process anymore. I recall the first time my own consultant started a client on disulfiram when I was in training. In fact, he became severely psychotic, and eventually he escaped from the treatment center. So it also can aid early recovery by reducing cravings or counteracting longer-term symptoms of withdrawal. So there are medications that I use because sometimes the client will say, I can withdraw. I don't mind the withdrawal symptoms. They are not very unpalatable or whatever. They're not very serious. But the craving is so intense that I go looking for the substance. You can use some to reduce craving, and then also you can counteract longer-term symptoms of the withdrawal. So this is how we use medication, in or pharmacotherapy to aid in withdrawal. We want clients to withdraw safely from the substance. And as I said, the other day, most clients will come and ask, say, please, I want to withdraw from so-and-so substance, and I've had very rough time withdrawing from it before, and I'm scared. I don't want to undergo those withdrawal symptoms anymore. Can you help me? What I want to do to help me withdraw safely? Because I really want to be abstinent. So we sit and discuss with them the various options before they agree and come maybe in a week or in 2 weeks' time. Pharmacotherapy for opioids. One of the best known pharmacotherapies for opioids is methadone. Methadone can be used, for short-term or to aid withdrawal, or long-term as maintenance therapy. In my place, though methadone is available, but we are not allowed to use it yet. If you have to get methadone, you have to cross a lot of hurdles to be able to get it and pay for it to use for any client. But some people are actually opposed to methadone. They think that you are actually introducing their own client or their own ward to another drug, and you don't believe that he has the capacity, to withdraw from the substance. And some of them frown at it, no matter what explanation, or evidence you give them. Some of them are not just disposed to that kind of a thing, using maintenance therapy. So it's not in every culture or society that people, would accept methadone readily. So it's not always available or even legal. In my place, it's legal, but it's not really readily available for us to use. I don't know about other experiences from other centers. Typically, pharmacotherapy is used along with counseling and other treatment services, not in place of them. It's not used to replace other psychosocial therapies. For instance, you're doing counseling or you're doing some social skills training, whatever. You cannot use pharmacotherapy in place of counseling and think that you have actually treated the patient. In my place, a lot of clients will come, or maybe their guardians or their sponsors will come and say, I want him to withdraw from this substance. And they think that, what are you going to justify? We've read about so that if you use so medication, you can detoxify the client, and that is all. I said, no, that is just a first step. You cannot just say detoxification is a replacement for other psychosocial treatment. So I don't know, can anyone share with us maybe one or two what they do in their own settings? Whether you use medication assisted withdrawal, or you use substitution therapy. Please, one or two people can share with us quickly? I can take that. Can anyone share with us, please? Yes, I want the administrator to help me out if anyone is sharing or. Anyway, if no answer is forthcoming, let's continue. Now we're going to mutual help programs.
Moses, there is a question that has.
Okay.
Someone is asking, how does methadone prevent withdrawal?
Yes. Methadone prevents withdrawal because it's an opioid. It's just like you're substituting one drug for the other. So methadone is a tablet, it's safe, and you know the quantity, the amount that you administer, and it is actually within safe limit, as opposed to or as compared to the substance that they're taking that you may not even know the quantity and the purity of the substance. And what you do is that you can titrate the methadone, against the withdrawal symptoms. You give a time once the person is withdrawing, then you now start building the dose of methadone, and then the dose that is able to abolish the withdrawal symptoms, for that period is the dose that you can maintain the client on, for a long time. So methadone is used because they act on the same receptors, and then they observe the same effects, in the brain. So methadone can be used, and you have control of the methadone in terms of dosage, in terms of the safety profile and everything. So it's actually the gold standard for withdrawal of opioid, and it's very good. It's just like substitute methadone for the other opioids. I hope the question is answered.
Yes, you can continue.
Okay. Mutual help programs. Mutual help programs are alternatives or enhancements to professional counseling. There are many mutual help programs, and as I said, pharmacotherapy is not the mainstay of treatment. It's best when you combine pharmacotherapy with counseling. But you can use pharmacotherapy alone for detoxification, but even then you have to counsel the patient, but you cannot use pharmacotherapy alone for treatment. So mutual health programs come, as adjunct therapies to help, in the treatment process, apart from the professional counseling. And then participants in mutual help groups support and encourage one another to become or stay drug-free. And the 12-step programs are perhaps the best known of mutual help programs. Yes, it's like they came earlier, and then most other mutual help programs built on the 12-step programs, especially the Alcohol Anonymous and Narcotic Anonymous. It's more or less modification or improvement on those programs. But the 12-step programs came earlier. So we have the very recognized ones are Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholic Anonymous was actually it started in the mid 1930s by Bill Wilson and Bob Smith. They are the one that came up with the idea of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's been a program that's been on since then, and many people use it. For some settings, only use Alcoholic Anonymous or the principle of Alcoholic Anonymous in the treatment of clients. So they use the 12-step program approach. That's all they do, counseling. They don't use any drug at all or any substance at all for treatment. So if it's beyond that, then they refer to other settings where the clients can be better handled. And then Narcotics Anonymous, that came up in the in the 1950s. So these are the well-known 12-step programs that started. And as I said, all others came later, and just an improvement or modification of these first two mutual self-help programs. And what are they, or how do they operate? AA and NA meeting types. There are meetings, yes, they can be opened or closed to the public. When you say they are open, it means that you can invite, for instance, the public to attend such group who are, and then when we say the public, those who are not using substances can also be part of the program, or you can even have friends or even family members attend. But when it's closed, it's only exclusively for members, those who have problems with alcohol use. So these are the ones that have closed programs, and they hold also all sorts of meetings. For instance, one of the meetings is discussion meetings. You have these meetings are facilitated by the members, and you have a member who is facilitating the meeting, might just introduce a topic, for instance. And once he introduces the topic, then all the other members contribute from their own personal experiences or from their own perspective. They contribute until the session ends. So, but you can also have all sorts of meetings. Another one is that the speaker meetings. In the speaker meetings, you get somebody who shares his or her story. Some of them have been very successful, and they have been abstinent for 20, 30 years. And none of for instance, the priest that started any drug treatment program at all in my own city, it was a Catholic priest who was also, he's a recovery client, but for the past 30 years, he's not been using any alcohol, and he has been treating clients successfully. So you invite people like that, they can come and share, in the group, and tell you how they have been able to manage, their own recovery. So you can have speaker meetings. And then 12-step study meetings discuss a particular step. For instance, there are different steps. We get to see the various steps later. So you can just take like the first or the second step, and then the idea behind that step, and then you discuss it, how it affects every member of the group. So the meetings are a little bit flexible in what they do, either it's discussion, speaker, or in taking one step after the other. In my own setting, we introduce them to this kind of meeting before they are discharged, so that when they are discharged, they can also find one that they are interested in and then join them. Sponsorship. What is sponsorship? A sponsor is an AAO or a member who has had successful experience with the program. So he can look after somebody who is, or he can mentor, so to speak, another client who is still struggling, with the substance use. And because he has actually been successful in managing he's able to guide and also support the other client who is struggling. But the relationship is an equal one. It's not like a mentor-mentee in that sense of the word. It is something that they see themselves as equal, not that one is more important than the other or is higher than the other. No. So that's how it operates in the group. And then works personally with a member with less experience. There are other 12-step mutual help programs. One is, for instance, Marijuana Anonymous. You have Cocaine Anonymous, Nicotine Anonymous. As I said, most of them try to pattern their own groups, just some modification in the 12-step program. And then because they have different substances of choice that they are dependent on, so they want it maybe exclusively for those who use those substances, and they don't seem to think that maybe a general 12-step program can solve their problem. So they now create their own, maybe for just those who use marijuana and cocaine or nicotine. And if it sits, in the open one, and you are invited and you hear them discuss, that in fact, from my own experience, sometimes what they may not share even with their counselors or with their therapists, during sessions, you find that they are free to talk because they know that they're encouraged by others, and they know that they're not alone, and they see people sharing, sincerely from their own experiences. Then they also learn to open up and share, and they learn from it and tend to support, each other.
Moses, we have a question.
Yes, please.
Which I think is a really appropriate one for as you're speaking. Fatima asked, does the sponsor have to be the same gender with the new member?
Oh, sorry, I should have said that. Yes, it's encouraged that the sponsor should be of same gender. You know, we know all the pitfalls and the various weaknesses that people have, even those who don't use substances. So it's encouraged that the sponsor must be of same gender, just to minimize trouble, along the way. So it should be of same gender, really. Thank you for that, Fatima. Any other questions, please?
Yes, Donald asked, does a professional moderate the 12-step program sessions?
No, not a professional as such. It's not a professional, but it's just the recovery clients, those of them who are addicted to the substance. It's the group members that actually facilitate the group sessions. It's not to have a professional. You can only introduce them to the group, but once the group picks up, they do it on their own, and they actually take turns, to do it, and they share topics among themselves. They share topics among them so that each time they meet, they're discussing one topic or the other, and then the facilitator only introduces the topic, and then they are free to share and from their own experiences, and then they give their own opinion or whatever they think of the subject. So it's actually very interesting when you sit amongst them, because if you have a professional there, he might not tackle it from their own angle. They want to feel belonging, that set of belongingness at the same level with everybody, so that they are free to share, and not anybody give them a lecture or tell them this is how it should be, but they are sharing the practical reality of what they are going through. So it's these recovery class members that actually facilitate. I hope I've answered the question. Then you have other 12-step programs for family and friends. And as I said, most of them, just an offshoot of the AA and NA, just some modification. In this one, now alone for all family members. Family members are actually invited. They can be part of the group, to support their own member of the family who is recovering from substance dependence. So family members can also attend, but usually, before you do such things, you have to tell them the do's and the don'ts, and the, whatever principles guide the 12-step program, so that when you fit in, you don't just cause some commotion, in the group. They are usually told what their own culture in that group, just some culture is, what their do's and don'ts, and are in the group, so that when family members, join, they are not there to pontificate or become judgmental or criticize or condemn. No. And then you have Al-Anon for adult or older adolescent family members and friends. Yes, adults or other adolescent family members can attend, and friends can attend the group where the client belongs, and they can also participate. They can also contribute, as people who are not recovering from substances. So these ones are actually now the open groups, not the closed one. Once you invite anybody outside of the users, then it's an open one. But if it's a closed one, they are not invited. Then you have Alatin for older children and younger adolescents, and Alatot for young children. Research results are mixed on whether other trusted programs. Research results are mixed on whether they are an effective program of recovery, but they are very difficult to study due to confidentiality. These are ethical issues, and then voluntary nature blocks control studies. Generally, for the 12-step, yes, most studies will tell you that they are actually effective, and they help the clients who are in recovery, and some of them actually are willing to share and to meet, because it helps them in their journey, because they have the support of other people who are in the who are struggling together, and then they can support themselves, throughout the journey of a recovery. So, but in resource constrained countries like ours, sometimes you find that even though they really have the intention, or they want, or they are motivated to join these groups, they will tell you they don't have the money, or they live far, so on and so forth. In my own place, we have to make some small budget for those who really want to be members, but they cannot, maybe transport themselves there, or cannot even meet up with the requirement of their group. So we make some small budget to transport them. Each time they come, we give them some transport fare to attend, and then also give them some small refreshment in the city, and encourage them to join in the places that the programs are nearest to their own place of residence. And it has helped many of them who really want to attend. And that has actually helped them, because you pick very early symptoms of anyone who is trying to relapse, or who is about relapsing, or has some difficulty, in the process of recovery. And there, when they share, you know that, oh, this one needs help, this one, is doing very well, and then they can share themselves, they can support themselves, and encourage, each other. So from there, you can really pick it very early. And sometimes you have to, the programs or the treatment facility might have to support them, to set up those ones, even to attend such groups. 12-step programs are not for everyone. Some people are uncomfortable with the spiritual aspects of the program, because there you say, well, it's like you don't have the power to overcome this problem of addiction, so you are dependent on a higher power. It may not mention specifically God or Allah or whoever, but you're looking up to a higher power. And you find that some people are not well disposed to this idea of depending on a higher power, and it has been criticized that you tend to um, somehow diminish the capacity of individuals who have the potential to recover without actually looking up to any higher power. So those who are atheists might not like this aspect of looking up to a higher power. And those who have difficulty in group and social situations might not be able to effectively use a group recovery program. So in your assessment and in your counseling sessions, those who are very anxious, who have social phobia and so on and so forth, who might not fit into this group, then you don't have to, include them in the group, because it will be very stressful for them, and they may not participate effectively. So these are some of the drawbacks, although the literature says that even atheists can actually use this 12-step program productively, but some atheists don't want that component, the spiritual aspect of the component, and they tend to criticize it. Other mutual help programs, Women for Sobriety, and then you have SMART, Self-Management and Recovery Training, recovery. Remember that this is not the SMART you have when you're talking about objectives. This is another mutual help program. Then you have rational recovery program, and the SMART for self-management and recovery program, depends on a trained facilitator, actually people who are actually conversant with it, and are actually trained, to do that. And they don't usually hold group sessions like in the 12-step program, and they believe that they can do it sometimes through the web, and they also can educate their members actually without actually having to meet as a group. So, but you need people who are actually very conversant and trained to do that, to do the SMART. It's not just like you have in the 12-step program where ordinary members can actually facilitate it. Then the rational recovery, which is based on the principle of rational emotive behavioral therapy, is based on those principles. So it uses the principle of rational emotive behavioral concept to be able to look at all the dysfunctional beliefs or maladaptive beliefs that are actually maintaining the addiction. So they work on such beliefs using that principle of REBT, and they also don't have to meet as 12-step recovery, like the 12-step recovery programs, AA and NA. They don't have to meet, in such groups. The Celebrate Recovery is more of a Christian-based program. It's based on biblical principles, and it uses these scriptures to help them, and it's also like the 12-step program, but it's Bible-based. And it doesn't deal with only alcohol or substance abuse. It actually deals with all forms of addiction. It can even include things like gambling and so on, sex addiction, so on and so forth. So it has a wider range. It doesn't limit itself to substances of abuse. And it might not be acceptable to those who are not Christians or who have of other faiths. Although sometimes you find people from other faiths join and they say that it's helpful to them. And you have the Melati Islami, which also incorporates the principle of the 12-step program, and then also adds Quranic teaching to it. So it integrates this principle together to help the individual in the path of peace, and so that they can work together, to achieve peace and don't have to depend on the negative influences of substance or people who will not aid them in their journey through life. So it's an Islamic version of similar to the Celebrate Recovery have in the Christian programs. And the Native American Sobriety movement also had its own. This was a program designed because the Native Americans actually did not benefit from the traditional 12-step programs like AA and NA. So they had to come down, with that program, and they used their own culture, they use their own rituals, they use their own spiritual beliefs, in the 12-step programs, and that has helped them because they're able to identify with those. It's like it's their own culture. So what are their cultural practices? What are their cultural beliefs? What are the cultural practices? So they brought them into this, and the rituals that they do, they brought them into the 12-step program, and they'll be able to identify because it's tailored towards their own as kind of society, and that has helped them better than the traditional 12-step program we have in AA and NA. So it helps them to be able to maintain a balance between the mind, and social life and spiritual life. So you discover that there's no one program that fits everyone. So sometimes you may have to tailor it to suit the individual, or give the options if they are available, so that they can attend to the one they like. Some who are religiously minded or spiritually minded may not even want the traditional AA. They will want you to say which one is higher power. They want the one that is spiritually inclined and tailored towards maybe their own faith. So they choose. So you just give this is an opportunity for them to be able to attend which one they want. At this point, I don't know whether anybody wants to share with us what they do from their own place before we round up. We know there are different settings. I don't know. Can anybody share with us what they do in their own setting before we move on?
Dr. Okuazu Kalu raised their hand.
Okay, please, if you can just share quickly.
Yes, I want to know whether someone can use the placebo in place of methadone.
Placebo?
Can replace it, yes.
Wow, not at all. If you use a placebo in the place of methadone without the consent of the client, that will be unethical, and the client can sue you, because some of them will tell you that they don't want the withdrawal symptoms. If you use a placebo and then they undergo this withdrawal symptom, it can be very severe for some. They can sue you and you'll be liable. You can't use a placebo. If you want to use a placebo, that has to be with the consent of the client. Any
Yes,
other before we move on? Okay, women for sobriety and rational recovery. We say both based on rational and multi-behavioral principles. Women for sobriety believes that women with alcohol use disorder require a different kind of recovery program than men do. So it's tailored, towards meeting the peculiar needs of women. And the rational recovery has no mutual help groups. You see, there are no mutual help groups, but provides online educational support to address irrational beliefs, as I said earlier. It's based on the principles of rational emotive behavioral therapy. So that's what it does. This was specifically for women. And then the SMART program, as I said, is not the SMART having objectives, but it's an offshoot of the rational recovery too, and focus on motivation, urges, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and satisfactions, and teaches increasing self-reliance rather than powerlessness, and uses no sponsors. Celebrate recovery, I've said it, this is what it does. In fact, I think we can just move on because we use it in my own place too. We use the AA, we use the NA, we use the Celebrate Recovery. So I'm conversant with, and I've attended all the various sessions and know what they do there. Move on. Melati Islami, as I said, is the worldwide fellowship of men and women joined together on the path of peace. Based on spiritual principles of the Quran and groups combine requirements of both Islam and 12-step approach addressing all SDGs program. And this one, we said it earlier, was created by White Bison Society in response to lack of success of American Indians in regular treatment and recovery programs. So it is based on their own the 12-step model, but rooted in traditional culture, spirituality, and rituals. So,
Moses,
yes, please.
is this where I make a funny noise and remind you that we only have a couple minutes left?
Yes, I know, that's I'm rushing. So,
okay, thanks.
Awareness of mutual health programs. Counselors need to be familiar with self and mutual health programs in their area so that they can, and they already apply to what is available and collect plans to try different programs, assist clients in selecting a useful support program and advocate for group creation where not available. And then there are others with medically managed treatment and general health services, treatment for mental disorders where you can treat co-occurring disorders, and then general schooling for adolescents or young adults. In my setting, we do all this because it's a treatment setting where you have physicians, psychiatrists, psychologists, and all the members of the multidisciplinary team. So we do most of this, including schooling, for adolescents. And then the other components too, employment skills training. When a patient stabilizes and we cannot provide the skill there, we arrange with other vocational training centers for them to go and acquire the skills while they're still, maintaining or remaining in treatment. Our one is more or less a hybrid because of the environment which we live. So it works for us. So childcare for group or individual sessions where women come with their children. How do you take care of the children? And for most centers in Nigeria, they don't even have facilities for such. And transportation to treatment activities and or mutual health meetings. I said it. There's an exercise that's supposed to be done here. 15 minutes, discussion on how these components are incorporated into SUD treatment in your community. This you will do it, in the email. You will. I think we have 1, 2, 3, 4. I will share it again. Testing for drug use. I want North Africa, those from North Africa, tell me how they do testing for drug use and share it in the email. And then pharmacotherapy for those who are in Southern Africa, not South Africa this time. Morocco has corrected me for Southern Africa pharmacotherapy. The mutual health groups for West Africa and then other components of treatment in East Africa. So you please try and do this and list 3 findings in each area. In your own experience, list 3 findings in each area, and then you can report them in the email. Then there's another, you can go to your resource page. That's the last thing we're doing now. Let me just share the resource page with you. So that you can look at the principles of the 12th step. I'll just share it, that's all, and I'm not going to read. This is the resource, sorry. I just want to share the resource page so that you can look into it. Please, can you see it?
Yes,
Can you see the resource page?
yes.
Okay, so when you go home, please, you can look at the principles of 12-step principles. This for Narcotics Anonymous. You read through this and then you will now understand how, you know, the 12 principles or 12 steps, you know, apply to the 12-step program. That will be another assignment for you. Please read it so that you can be conversant with it, because we are constrained by time. Thank you very much for listening and for participating in this session. So we now give time to Beatrice to continue.
Thank you very much, Moses, for that elaborate presentation. I know that this is your very exciting part because that's what you do every day. It's unfortunate we don't have lots of time, but we will discuss this a lot more in the chat. And thank you, members, because you have been very active on the chat. We appreciate that. And a couple of questions that you have asked, we shall also post them in the chat and discuss them there together. So I just want to remind you that where we are in terms of what we are doing, I want to remind you that we have been looking, or we started looking at Curriculum 2, which is an overview of treatment. And we looked at the various components of the continuum of care. We talked about the pre-treatment, we talked about primary treatment, and we talked about, or we introduced the continuing care. In the pre-treatment, we discussed issues of outreach, issues of screening, assessment, treatment planning, case management, and also detox. Now, in the phase of primary treatment, we have been discussing many things. We discussed counseling. Today we have talked about testing with Moses, pharmacotherapy, the use of mutual help groups, as well as other activities, including medically managed programs, including management of co-occurring disorders. So we are now in the final phase of the continuum of care, which is what we are calling the continuing care. Now, continuing care is what used to be referred to previously as, previously called aftercare. Aftercare was to suggest that it would come after something. You see, aftercare would mean it comes after something. And lots of evidence has shown that if you start thinking of what happens after primary treatment so much later or after the program, the success rate with clients is not high. And therefore, we no longer use the term follow-up or aftercare as such. Instead, we use the terminology continuing care. This is to imply that we want what we are going to do with the client after they leave our active or primary treatment to be a continuation of what they began when they were already in primary treatment. And therefore, when we think about our work with our clients, let us look at which part of the continuum of care we have been strongest and what part we have been weakest. I notice that in our country, we are very strong in primary treatment, but we are very weak in continuing care. So in this part of the presentation, we're going to look at what continuing care plan is. We're going to look at the goals. We're going to look at the groups that we can put our clients in for continuing care. And we're also going to look at some of the supports that we can connect our clients with as part of continuing care. So from this slide, we can see that a continuing care plan, we are talking about a plan. And I like the way this curriculum talks about management of recovery. Remember, we said management of recovery has to do with planning. And now we are talking about continuing care as yet another form of a plan. It's a documented plan of action, which is developed before discharge or transfer to another level of care. So we recognize that sometimes our clients may leave our treatment center, not because they are well and they are going home, but because they need to go to another level of care. Maybe you're transferring them from a purely SUD treatment center to a center where they can access maybe treatment for psychiatric illnesses or mental illnesses. Maybe you're transferring them from a psychiatric care to where they can, receive more intensive, SUD services. So remember what Morekwe talked about, the different treatment settings. That's what these different levels of care is about. Now, this plan has to be structured, and it has to be goal-oriented. This is important for purposes of monitoring and evaluation in terms of finding where your client is going with their recovery. The other important thing is that it is developed jointly by the client and counselor. That's to say it must be collaborative. Remember, again, very early we talked about one of the principles of treatment. And we said one of it has to do with client empowerment. And I remember we were being challenged, or we were challenging ourselves. How can we ensure that our clients are being empowered, our clients are involved, if sometimes they come in severe states of psychosis? And we did agree that as they go on stabilizing, we must keep on involving them as collaborative partners to plan for their continuing care and other treatment services. It does also include recovery capital and possible challenges. Remember, Morekwe covered recovery capital. Please do remember, we had the personal recovery capital, which comprised of human and the physical. The physical was what is tangible, what you can almost see. The human was what is more subjective, like the client's internal resources. And then she talked about family recovery capital. She talked about community and cultural. So we are thinking about, as part of continuing care, what kind of recovery capital do we want to boost for the client? Is it the family? Is it the social? Is it the community? Is it the cultural? Is it the personal? Is it the physical? Maybe we want them to go back to school. That's about physical. Maybe we want to build their self-esteem. That is human. So we have to think about that. Our goal in working on continuing care is several. One is to sustain abstinence. That is key. But secondly, we want to continue developing recovery supports. Remember, when they leave primary treatment, they lose the support that they had in your treatment center or in your treatment setting. So we need to ensure that where they are going, they have several recovery supports. We also want them to gain community living. Remember, we said that recovery is holistic, that as our clients recover, we want them to get integrated into the community. Remember the definition of recovery, and the definition of wellness. It had to do with someone participating in the society. It had to do with someone achieving their maximum potential. So as part of continuing care, we want to connect the client to some of the community activities that they can actually be able to be incorporated in. We also want to help them gain employment skills if they didn't have any. If they didn't have education, we want them to acquire education. If they had issues of going back to school or going back to work, maybe they had been in school, but they came out of school because of substances, or they had a job and they had stopped working for a time. So we want them to go back to all this. We also want to ensure that if our clients have a co-occurring mental disorder, it is also actually addressed. Now, the other important goal is to develop a deeper understanding of the self. I have seen many times that if my clients or clients I have worked with, or even family members that were in a treatment for SUD, they left treatment, primary treatment, and some of them started undertaking a self-awareness course. Some of them go to start doing a counseling course, not necessarily to be counselors, but to continue enhancing their self-awareness. I have actually seen the level of recovery success is actually extremely high, because that deeper understanding means that the client can actually continue to understand themselves better and take more control of their life, including the triggers for their relapse, including monitoring emotions that trigger them to start using after being in recovery, among other things. We also want the client to increase responsibility. Remember what Moses told us very early, that in the cycle of addiction, the client begins with using substances and doing many other things. But over time, the substance takes over all these other responsibilities, takes over school, takes over work, takes over family, takes over friends. So now as they recover and we want them to go back to community, we want them to start taking on more responsibility. Many of their families have a lot of conflicts. We want to help them work on those family difficulties. We also want to consolidate and reinforce the life changes happening in them. Remember, the client had a lifestyle in the world of addiction. Now you have moved them from that comfort into a new world. That new world can look very uncomfortable for the client. So part of our responsibility is to help them consolidate the gains of that change, is to reinforce their new life and the experiences that they're having, is to help them deal with the challenges so that they become comfortable with that new life. And of course, integrating them into the community with meaningful roles. So if, for example, there was a religious community that they can join, if there are social clubs that they can join, if there are community, responsibilities they can undertake, all that is part of integration. Now, what are some of the continuing care groups we can connect our clients to? You can connect them into groups that are exploring substance-free social and recreational activities. So remember, our clients had a life that was centered around substance use. So as they recover, there can be a sense of loneliness. There can be a sense of isolation. So one of the groups that you can form or you can connect your clients to, if there is none, is a group of people who are exploring recreational and social activities without substances. The second one is life skills. Life skills are very many. It could be problem solving, it could be taking responsibility, and many other examples that you can think about. So you can actually put them in a group to acquire that skill. You can also put them in a group that's working on relapse prevention. This is very powerful because the focus on the members of that group is actually to stay sober and to remain abstinence. You can also put them in a group that's focusing on health and wellness. You can put them in a group that's exploring career and education. You can even put them in a group that's basically looking for supportive counseling, where people can discuss their concerns, their fears, their worries, etc. You can put them in a leadership skills development group. You can also put them in a mutual help group like Moses just told us. The other continuing care supports that you can offer your clients, besides putting them in a mutual help group like the ones Moses has discussed, is actually connecting them to individual therapy. This is important because it also has its place. The other important continuing care support you can offer your client is treating them for co-occurring disorders if they have any. If your client begins a methadone program, you also want them to continue with methadone maintenance as part of continuing care. You can also continually support your client through phone therapy or even what we call monitoring. You can actually do a check where you give them a call or a visit as the case may be, depending on the nature of your program, or even they come for a checkup. Other supports include connecting them to religious or spiritual institutions. I think we have been told about that. Sometimes you have got cultural traditions that support recovery. You can encourage them to embrace them. Sometimes you can do, like I have said, periodic home visits or what we are calling booster sessions. And I want to emphasize intensive case management in terms of monitoring support. Now, I want to say that while we introduce case management when we're talking about pre-treatment, it's good to note that case management cuts across all the phases. We do case management at pre-treatment, we do case management in primary treatment, we do case management in continuing care. Of course, you can also take them or encourage them to do job training or other schooling. Now, some exercises for us, which we shall be sharing in the group. I want you to reflect on the existing resources that are there in your country for continuing care. What continuing care support resources do you have? And secondly, what is it that you do not have that you would like to have? What we call a wish list. And because we have got a minute or so, I want you to just type there in your chat one existing resource and one absent resource for continuing care. So please type it in your chat. Anybody, and I'll be able to read it. Yes, a continuing care support that you offer your clients in your country, and also one that you don't offer and you think you would wish to offer. So we have 1 minute to do that. Yes, anybody that has got a wish list that they would like to offer. For example, I'll give you an example of what I saw in the earlier questions. Someone said that they did not know about Alatot. They have heard about the rest, but not that one, the one for children, for younger children. Others may not have heard about Alatin. So you may want to think about some of the things you may want to introduce or think about back home from the various support services that we have talked about. We will discuss that more when we come to the group discussion. Now, the final assignment here is an interesting assignment. There are case studies in your resource page, which we shall be sharing in due course. And in these case studies, you have different descriptions of clients. And what you're supposed to do is to imagine that is your client with those problems. And you ask yourself, what are some of the continuum of care needs of that client? So the client is described, and you're supposed to make a presentation on that client. I'm supposed to move them from, maybe you met them at outreach, and then you want to connect them to a primary treatment, but maybe before then you want to do a screening, you want to do an assessment, you might discover they need a detox, you may then refer them to a primary treatment, you may want to decide whether it is a residential treatment. Remember, Morekwe took us through the different types of settings, so you make a decision about that. And then once they're in that treatment setting, you choose the different activities you want them to do or they should be engaged in. Do you want counseling? Do you want pharmacotherapy? Is there drug testing? And then you also go back to go to the very far end of the continuing care and make suggestions of some of the activities that you would actually engage that client in. So basically what you will be doing in these assignments when you're teaching them back in your institutions is to have people work in groups, assign them each a case, and let each of them dress that case by moving them through the continuum of care. We are coming to the end of Module 6. Module 6 introduced us to the various components of continuing care, or continuum of care. And once again, I want to say that it is for us to reflect about what we are doing in our countries, ask ourselves whether what we are doing in our countries is important, is sufficient. I have said previously that sometimes we think our clients are failing to recover. We need to ask ourselves, is it our clients failing treatment, or is it our treatment is failing the client because it is one-sided? It is neglecting very many components of the continuum of care. I wish to hand it over to Morekwe to take us, to introduce us to our final module of this course. Thank you very much. Morekwe.
Thank you, Beatrice. Let me just take this opportunity to say good evening to all of us. I'm just excited that we are active and participating throughout. I'm gonna just give me a minute to show the slide. So as my colleagues have already mentioned, we've covered a lot so far. We have gone through module 1 up to 6. And now our focus is going to turn to evidence-based practice for treatment intervention. We do have an appreciation that treatment of SUD has actually gone through various changes in terms of understanding, in terms of implementation. And we are lucky that now, because of the rigor in terms of research, advancement in terms of techniques that are used, we now have a better understanding in terms of what treatment works and what treatment does not work. So in this module, let's see what the module intends to cover. We are hoping that by the end of the module, we are all in a position to actually define what evidence-based practice is. Not only that, but understand the importance of why we should all know evidence-based practices. We should also be able to identify key components of 6 specific evidence-based practices that we are going to discuss in this module. And then, most importantly, to discuss how these evidence-based practices actually would be applicable and relevant in terms of your context in the different countries that you come from. We are not going to do this exercise, but when you are training, the exercise is to ensure that we mix our participants together based on experience, so that we have diversity in terms of discussions within groups. So we are, since we are doing online, but we are hoping that when you do it face-to-face, you will get more the benefit of doing such an exercise. As Beatrice has already mentioned, we'll still emphasize what you've covered so that we don't forget. We've covered recovery, we've defined it, we've discussed recovery management. I do remember there was that bumpy road that Beatrice showed us. We talked about recovery capital. We talked about factors that affect treatment outcomes. We covered ways in which we can actually look at treatment. We also discussed process and stages of change, pre-contemplation and all that. We also gave examples of scenarios looking at clients in different stages. We covered basic principles of treatment and components of treatment. So we are now moving into treatment. What is it that we do in treatment? Before we go further into discussing about treatment or specifically evidence-based practice, I would want to hear from colleagues what their thinking is or their understanding of evidence-based practice. Carrie, if you don't mind, I'm just going to ask participants to just note that on the chat, and then you can read 2 or 3 of the responses in terms of the understanding of evidence-based practice.
I'm more than happy to moderate that once I see some comments.
Yes, evidence-based practice.
So,
any response? Yes.
Yeah, I just got a treatment method that has been scientifically proven, scientifically tested approaches, and practices that have been proven to have the best outcome.
Good. Those responses actually relate more to the definition that has been proposed by the National Quality Forum. It is, like you've already said, it's practices, right? For which evidence is strongest and most accepted. I think we should underscore strongest and most accepted, and that are likely to have significant impact on improving care. I've highlighted improving care because when we do provide interventions, at the back, or the most important is that we want to significantly improve care so that we improve the lives of those that we are offering services so that they can have improved overall health. Now, the definition has this aspect of improved care that I've just highlighted, and it's very important. For example, the Institute of Medicine in the US found that there is substandard treatment, and mostly among SUD in individuals. And they define the substandard as treatment that is, 1, not safe, treatment that is not effective, right? That is not patient-centered or client-centered, treatment that is not timely, because sometimes we don't even think about the timeliness in which we attend our clients. So that is substandard, treatment that is not efficient, and treatment that is not equitable or fair. That is how they define substandard. I would think about like where we are. Are we providing standard of care that, or substandard as defined by the Institute of Medicine in the US? They also found that only 10% of the people with alcohol use disorders received recommended care. So 90% of the people with alcohol disorders did not receive the recommended care, and this resulted in increased mortality and morbidity. The findings that are here on the slide actually related more to the lack of sufficient services, as well as the substandard care that the patients were being given. I wanted us to pause for a minute just to think about whether this type of finding, where you find that people are receiving, or less people are receiving recommended care, or probably most people are receiving substandard care. And I would want us to share our experiences in terms of the care that is provided or the treatment that is provided in our facilities in the different countries. So I'll give you a minute just to share. Actually, we can just ask people to raise their hands, 2 volunteers to raise their hands in terms of their experience when it comes to standard of care. Fatima has raised her hand. I believe you can unmute your mic just to tell us whether the findings, can you relate to the findings, and how can you relate to the findings in your setting?
Yes, I want to talk about substandard care.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, sometimes last year, around between October and January this year, the government of this state, where I am in Kaduna State in Nigeria, and the government of Kaduna State went all out to different centers. You know, people under spiritual care, you know, were like enslaving children. You know, they just put people in a building, some half-baked buildings, some buildings that are not okay. Over 200 people in a room, saying that they are caring for them because they have substance use problem. So a lot of them are having problems. So the government went out to various centers and started releasing these children. You know, some of them came for Quranic teaching, but some too were brought by their parents because they were deviant at home, because they were using drugs. So I think this is a serious substandard treatment, and the government came out and you know, lock up these centers, you know, and release the children back home so that they can access better treatments.
Thank you, Fatima, for sharing. It does speak to us to think about whether in our countries, actually, do we have a guideline, do we have a framework when we talk about standard of care, particularly in the field of addiction. I know that for Beatrice, I've looked at Kenya's standard, at least there is. Unfortunately, in our country, we don't even have those standard of care that is specific or that are specific to addiction or SUD treatment. And therefore, it's not surprising that such is actually still found in the different parts of the world, including the US. So to move on, the definition, as you recall, it also has practices, right? We are talking about evidence-based practices. These are sets of techniques and approaches that are normally derived from evidence-based counseling techniques. So now when we talk about evidence-based practices, these practices could be practices from the different counseling theories and used in a combination or one. So it's a combination of techniques or approaches that are derived from counseling theories such as behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. The study that I mentioned earlier on from the Institute of Medicine has actually also, in response to their findings, included or expanded the definition of evidence-based practice to include the following: to include science, right? To include the aspect of clinical and financial feasibility, also to include clinical expertise. Now let's look at what the science part of it means. When you look at the science, because I know when people were giving definitions earlier on, they emphasize the science when you talk about evidence-based. It has the concept of empirically validated evidence, right? Meaning evidence that is based on information gained through direct observation. And I want us to pause here. Direct observation has to be consistent. It's not just one observation where you see, you know what, I treated a client and this method works. It has to be consistent across different settings for it to be evidence-based. And it also, when we think of science, it's about experience, and obviously it's vast experience in terms of employing such a practice. And then evidence, most importantly, and most of us, when we think of evidence, we think about experiment. Earlier on, I had mentioned that our understanding in terms of effective treatment actually has been facilitated mostly by research findings, particularly in treatment outcomes. So empirical, you're thinking science, you're thinking experiments, direct observation that is validated. The expansion also included clinical and financial feasibility. And this is very important because at times when people talk about evidence-based practices, we think about the results that we get in terms of labs or research settings, and we forget the context in which we're going to implement the findings. So when we say it's evidence-based, it has to be, you have to be able to implement it in real life treatment setting. So it has to be reasonable. Is it reasonable if you have research findings that show that this method works? Can you be able to reasonably implement it in a treatment facility? Is it achievable? At times when we do research, we get good results, but in terms of implementing the results, it's not achievable. Is it economically possible? Most of us come from low resource countries. This is a question that we have to always bear at the back of our mind when we employ evidence-based practices. Is it reasonable? Is it achievable? Is it economically possible? There's also the aspect of clinical expertise. Important is that those that are implementing the practice also have to be conversant and cognizant of what it is that they're doing. They have to have a basis or basic skills in counseling skills. They also have to have the ability to connect with clients. And most importantly, have to be trained in the use of the specific practice. I've seen, like in my practice, even in training, where people would say that they're using CBT, and then when you look at their notes, there's nothing CBT about it. So when we talk about theories or approaches, or we have to be specifically trained in those for us to effectively implement and say that we are actually using evidence-based practices in our facilities. Why should we really care about evidence-based practice? I want to ask, why is it important for us to be talking about evidence practices? I'm going to throw that question to you, colleagues. You can raise your hand. Why do we need to know and care about evidence-based practices? You can raise your hands. I see two, I can't see from my screen, Carrie, who raised, but I see that two people raised their hands. If you could kindly just help me so that you let me know who, and then they can unmute their mic.
Yeah, so far I saw Fatima raised her hand. I'm looking to see who else.
Yes. I think we need evidence-based practices so that we can have standards. You know, we cannot just be doing treatment anyhow or haphazardly. There has to be standard to follow in order to be able to achieve the best results.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we also have Dr. Godfrey and Samuel, who both have raised their hands.
Okay, you can take one more or two more people's. Why do we? Because it's very important for us to care about evidence-based practices.
Godfrey?
Yeah, this is Godfrey from Uganda.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need evidence-based practices to use our resources well,
Mm-hmm.
but also we need to consider the safety of the patient.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So you are concurring in terms of, is it safe, is it reasonable? Yes, the last point you said, the safety of the
Yes.
client. Is it safe? Yes. So you're going back to the previous slide in terms of is it safe? Yes. No, thank you. The last participant or the
Okay, Samuel from Nigeria.
Mhm.
Can I continue?
Yes.
Can I go on, please? Okay. I'm actually from Nigeria. I just want to say that why we need evidence-based practices is because a lot of people have claims. Just like we have people having claims for the cure for coronavirus, people are actually having fictitious claims so that they can have, customers, clients, patients coming to their facilities. Okay, so it's very important for us to have evidence-based practice to ensure that persons who actually deliver FED services actually know the skill and are not just doing anything they want to do in the name of practice.
No, thank you. All that really speaks more to why should we care. I do appreciate your responses in that the safety of our client actually is at the uttermost. When we do not use practices that are evidence, we do not know their efficacy, we do not know whether they do take care of all the aspects that are needed in terms of taking care of our clients or patients. The one thing in terms of evidence-based practices, why we should care, they've shown to improve treatment outcomes. And this is more so because of a lot of research that has come out specifically in terms of treatment outcomes, looking at evidence-based practices. International organizations have actually called on to the increased use of evidence-based practices to improve treatment globally within the SUD field. UNODC and WHO actually have a document titled Principles of Drug Treatment as a discussion paper that outlines why evidence-based practices are needed. So in that discussion paper, this is a quote taken from that paper, it states that evidence-based good practice and, okay, because I can't see from here, and accumulated scientific knowledge on the nature of drug dependence should guide interventions and investments in drug treatment. I'm just going to read it again because I couldn't read. Evidence-based good practice and accumulated scientific knowledge on the nature of drug dependence should guide interventions and investment in drug dependency treatment. The high quality of standards required for approval of pharmacological and psychological interventions in all other medical disciplines should be applied in the field of drug dependence. And this statement, actually, for me, it speaks more to the fact that sometimes when we think about evidence-based practices, we don't seem to put more emphasis when it comes to the field of addiction. Think about in your countries as to how is it regulated? Is it regulated as much as HIV, if you could think about it? And therefore, it speaks more to, even for us, when we teach and also at the back of our minds, when we are going to develop curricula, to be thinking more about how do we inform policy in terms of development of our programs, and some of the modules that we will be developing in the programs that we intend to develop after completing this training. The recommended evidence-based practices are pharmacotherapy, which Moses has actually been teaching us about. We do have a full understanding that pharmacotherapy on its own is not as effective compared to the combination of it in other modalities of counseling. Cognitive behavioral therapies are also recommended. Motivational enhancement therapy, I'm just reading them because we will have an opportunity to go into details about what they are and understand the applications and techniques within. Contingency management is one of the recommended evidence-based practice. 12-step facilitation therapy, Moses talked about that. Marital and family therapy. These are recommended evidence-based practices as by the National Quality Forum in the US. The ones that are not recommended are acupuncture, right? They are not recommended in terms of the effectiveness. I think we just have to underline why are they not recommended? They are not recommended because they have been seen not to be as effective compared to the other therapy modalities or practices that I've just mentioned. Relaxation therapy, education, drug testing, detox as a standalone. We did, I think it was Moses who had presented about detox. That is the first sort of entry, if you may say, in terms of real treatment. You detox so that somebody actually can be in a position actually to listen, to understand what it is that you'll be talking about in therapy. The other one that might surprise some of us is individual psychodynamic therapy. I would want somebody just to tell us why they think this individual psychodynamic therapy would not be recommended as an effective practice in the field of SUD. Just raise your hand. Why would this not be recommended?
Looks like Samuel has raised his hand.
Let him go ahead. Samuel, go ahead and unmute your mic. Samuel.
Unless his hand was still up from before.
The other two participants who have raised their hands, Carrie. Why wouldn't we, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I had Samuel and Godfrey, but I don't know if that was from earlier.
So can we ask them to, you can also unmute their mics.
Godfrey, did you want to share something?
No, I think it was the earlier one.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody want to have a step on it? In terms of why psychodynamic therapy would not be recommended, the psychodynamic theory focuses on the past for those that are doing counseling and goes deeper into the unconscious, and therefore it's less likely to be as effective when you look at comparing the other therapies. But we'll have chance to actually discuss the evidence-based practices and why they're considered to be effective. And then the other one that is not recommended is an unstructured group therapy. Yesterday, Beatrice, or the day before, Beatrice talked about the different types of groups that we have, and she had emphasized that when our clients actually are put in groups, it has to be structured because they come from a very unstructured sort of environment because of addiction. Addiction unstructures one's life, and therefore a structured group would give a sense of structure and stability in terms of providing therapy for our clients. Confrontation is not recommended as the main approach. I appreciate as the main approach to treatment. Discharge from treatment in response to relapse. So there are other facilities that punish, because for me this is not a treatment. There are other facilities that sometimes punish clients when they relapse, but we do understand from curriculum 1 that addiction is a brain disease that is a relapsing disease. So that appreciation of what it is, what addiction is, actually helps in terms of informing our interventions. It is important, as we will be discussing evidence-based practices, to understand that equally important in terms of the delivery of treatment of SUD is that the counselor should be empathetic. The supportive approach also is very important to augment the evidence-based practices. the counselor's ability to engage and develop a helping relationship with the client is crucial. I think it was on Friday where we talked about the importance of engagement when we're talking about assessment. The same still follows in terms of your ability to build rapport when you are providing treatment for a client. We will cover the following: cognitive behavioral therapy. Those are the evidence-based practices that we are going to cover. Motivational approaches, certain family approaches. You see, certain, there are many, but we are only going to cover certain ones, family approaches, contingency management, and then we are going to cover pharmacotherapies for opioid and alcohol dependence. I've seen that a lot of people have been asking about methadone, so we have probably a chance to discuss more about methadone when we get to that discussion. We are not going to start on cognitive behavioral therapy, but I wanted to draw our attention in terms of reading, because there is a summary of the National Quality Forum work on evidence-based practices in your resource page, resource page, yes, 7.1. So please go back to that resource page. It has extensive information in terms of evidence-based practices. And then along with that is that your resource page 7.8 and 7.9 has additional information and describes additional evidence-based practices that you could actually read on your own. With that, this is the end of my presentation. Thank you. Thank you. I don't know whether there are any questions, because it's 1 minute to 8. Somebody said, what about counseling? Counseling, I'm just seeing counseling. Yes, counseling is recommended. Counseling, there are different theories in counseling that we'll actually cover from tomorrow. So counseling is recommended. It's just which type of counseling. Thank you, please. Okay, thought it was a question. Oh,
Thank
okay.
you all.
Yes.
We have such excellent presenters, and I love how engaged and you're all clearly paying attention and asking great questions. So thank you for that. I know we're spending a lot of time, and ICU DDR, myself and Cam are grateful to all of you. And I guess you'll same time tomorrow. Okay. Thanks to everyone. Be well. Good to see you.